You know that moment when your whole life collapses in one night? When the person you trusted with everything, your heart, your home, your child, suddenly looks at you and says, "You need to leave?" I never thought that would happen to me. But it did, and that night I learned something I hadn't known before. Life doesn't warn you. It doesn't give you time to prepare. It just happens. And you either survive or you don't. I met Ryan when I was 23. He wasn't the handsome, perfect type you see in movies. He was quiet, a little awkward, the kind of man who would blush if you complimented him. But he was kind, genuinely kind, and after dating a few heartbreakers in college, that kindness felt like the safest place in the world. I thought, this is it. This is the man who will protect me, who will love me, who will be my home. He had this way of noticing the little things. The way my coffee cup was always too small, so he'd bring me a bigger one. The way he'd text goodnight every single day, even when he was exhausted from work. The little smiles he gave me when I cracked a bad joke. The way he held my hand on long walks. It all felt simple, but in those simple moments, I found comfort. We married 2 years later in a tiny backyard wedding, surrounded by fairy lights, cheap wine, and people who mattered most. Nothing fancy, but perfect in its own way. And then Oliver was born, and I thought life couldn't get any better. I truly believed we had it all: love, family, stability. I thought we had reached the dream everyone talks about. But dreams, they're fragile. They can shatter without warning. At first, the changes were subtle. He started working longer hours. I thought nothing of it. He was providing for us, I told myself. Then came the small silences, a text unanswered, a shrug, a glance that seemed distant. And slowly, the quiet swallowed the love we once shared. I tried to fix it. I cooked his favorite meals. I left little notes in his lunch bag. I tried to spark conversation, to rekindle the closeness we had lost. Nothing worked. And then came the perfume, that floral scent he never wore, the kind of smell that made your stomach churn. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, my gut already knew. And then, that Friday night came. I remember it like a photograph burned into my brain. Oliver had fallen asleep early, exhausted from the day's routine. I was folding laundry, glancing at the clock, thinking he'd be home any minute. But when Ryan came in, it was different. He didn't look at me. He didn't greet me. He walked straight to the bedroom, dragging his bag behind him. I followed, probably naively, hoping for a conversation, a reason, a shred of the man I married. He looked at me and said, "I can't do this anymore, Emma. I'm done pretending." I froze. My first thought was that he was having a breakdown. I said, "Let's talk in the morning." But he shook his head. "There won't be a morning. Not for us." Then he told me he'd been seeing someone else, a young coworker, someone barely out of college. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach, and then he asked me to leave, me, with our son. I didn't know where to go. I had $43 in my wallet, a crying 3-year-old in the back seat, and a silence so heavy it pressed down on my chest. I drove aimlessly, tears blurring my vision, until I found a parking lot behind a 24-hour grocery store. I parked, turned off the engine, and just sat there. Oliver was asleep, holding his bear, and I sat, not knowing whether to scream, cry, or just disappear. I remember thinking about all the little promises, the coffees, the notes, the smiles, the weekends at the park. How could all of that disappear so quickly? How could a person I trusted betray me like this? And somewhere deep in that despair, a quiet voice whispered, "You will survive." Morning came too soon. Sunlight spilled into the car, warming Oliver's face. And that's when the reality hit. No one was coming to save me. Not Ryan, not family, not friends. I had to save myself. Finding shelter was the first challenge. Every listing was either too expensive or too dangerous. Finally, after days of searching, I found a small room in an old building, $200 a week, all utilities included. The apartment smelled faintly of cigarettes, had peeling wallpaper, and strange stains on the walls. But it was a door that locked. It was a bed. It was ours. The first nights were unbearable. Anxiety gripped me every morning. How will I feed Oliver? How will I pay rent? How will I survive another day? But I had to try. There was no other option. Work became the first anchor. I hadn't worked in years. Every application felt like rejection waiting to happen. Coffee shops, grocery stores, cleaning services, finally, a bakery called. Part-time, early mornings, long hours, low pay. I took it immediately. The bakery gave me more than money. It gave me a routine. It gave me a reason to get out of bed. It gave me a sense of usefulness. Each day, I prepared Oliver for daycare, went to work, and felt something slowly returning: strength, confidence, the faintest hint of hope. Evenings were for tears. I cried on the floor while Oliver slept, letting out months of frustration, grief, and anger. But slowly, laughter returned. Small victories, small joys. Sunlight in our tiny apartment, Oliver's laughter, the smell of fresh bread. Life, fragmented and fragile, began to return. I started journaling. Not about him, not about betrayal, but about me. What I wanted, what I dreamed of, what I hoped for. I wrote the word peace, and I meant it. And for the first time, I began to feel it creep back into my life quietly, gently, in the laughter of my son, in small smiles, in days that didn't revolve around loss. I reconnected with friends. I took walks in the park. I experimented with small pleasures, new recipes, books, quiet moments alone. And slowly, the old me, the me before betrayal, began to return. I realized survival wasn't just about physical needs. It was about reclaiming myself, about learning to trust life again, to trust myself. And though the night Ryan kicked me out haunted me, it also taught me that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. The first few days after finding the apartment were surreal. I woke up every morning, not to the sound of Ryan's alarm or his coffee brewing, but to silence heavy, almost deafening, broken only by the soft breathing of my son in his little bed. I remember standing in the tiny kitchen, staring at the counter, thinking, I have no idea how I'm going to feed us today. The cupboards were empty, the fridge bare. The $200 I had saved felt like both a lifeline and a cruel joke, enough to survive a week, maybe two. And then, I didn't want to think about then. I started walking to nearby stores, clipping coupons, trying to stretch every dollar. I learned to cook with the bare minimum: rice, beans, frozen vegetables, eggs. Somehow, it became almost enjoyable, the challenge of turning nothing into something for my son. Each small meal felt like a tiny victory, a proof that I could still provide, still nurture, still be a mother. The first nights, I would sit on the floor of the apartment, Oliver asleep in his bed, and just breathe. I let the tears come. I let the grief flow. I allowed myself to feel the betrayal, the fear, the anger. And slowly, I realized crying didn't mean I was weak. It meant I was alive. It meant I was processing. Then came the job search. I hadn't worked seriously in years. I'd depended on Ryan for the finances, and now, suddenly, it was all on me. I applied everywhere: small bakeries, coffee shops, grocery stores, even cleaning jobs that paid barely above minimum wage. Every rejection stung. Every silence lingered like a shadow. But I kept trying. I had to. A small bakery finally called. I remember the excitement, the disbelief, and the relief that washed over me. I took the job immediately. Early mornings, long hours, hard work, low pay, but it was something. And I realized quickly that work was more than money. Work was routine. Work was purpose. Work was a reason to get up every day. The first morning, walking to the bakery with Oliver bundled in his stroller, I felt a strange combination of fear and hope. Could I really do this? Could I survive this alone? But as I stepped inside the bakery, greeted by the warm smell of fresh bread and the soft chatter of morning customers, I felt a flicker of life returning. The bakery became my anchor. Each day, kneading dough, cleaning counters, serving customers, I felt myself reconnecting with the world. I was seen again, needed again, useful again. And each paycheck reminded me that I was capable, that I could provide, that I could survive. At home, I began rebuilding our routine. I bought a small notebook and started journaling. Not about Ryan, not about betrayal, but about me. What I wanted, what I hoped for, what made me happy. I wrote about Oliver, about our mornings, about the quiet joys that I had forgotten existed. I started noticing small details I had overlooked before. The way sunlight fell on the kitchen floor, the smell of Oliver's hair when I tucked him in at night, the softness of the sheets in our tiny bed. These moments, small and ordinary, became the foundation of a new life. I learned to embrace solitude. At first, it was terrifying. Being alone with your thoughts, your fears, your memories, it's daunting. But slowly, I realized solitude could be healing. I could focus on myself, on my son, on rebuilding our lives without constantly managing someone else's expectations or emotions. I started taking small steps to regain control. Cooking new recipes, reading a book, going for long walks in the park with Oliver. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with during my marriage. I allowed myself to laugh again, freely, without guilt. Months passed. Slowly, our life took shape. The apartment, though small, became a home. The bakery job, though exhausting, became a source of pride. Every day I woke up and faced challenges: bills, cleaning, cooking, work, parenting. But each day I also faced victories, Oliver laughing, a customer complimenting a pastry, a friend calling just to check in. Through this process, I began to see a pattern. Life isn't about huge leaps. It's about consistency. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard. Every small act, cooking breakfast, making a bed, smiling through exhaustion builds resilience. And slowly, through these repeated acts, I began to rebuild not just our life, but myself. I also began reflecting on the past. Ryan, the betrayal, the young coworker. Social media became a source of both curiosity and pain. One day, I looked them up. Pictures of smiles, perfect moments, filtered lives. For a moment, anger and jealousy flared. Then, slowly, I understood it wasn't about her. It was about him. His choices defined him, not me. And for the first time, I stopped blaming myself. I realized survival wasn't just about food or money. It was about reclaiming my identity, reclaiming my strength, reclaiming my ability to love and trust, not blindly, but consciously. Through these months, I discovered small joys. Making pancakes for Oliver, reading him bedtime stories, quiet evenings with a cup of tea, baking bread and sharing it with neighbors. These moments, ordinary and fleeting, became milestones. They reminded me that life, even after betrayal, could be beautiful. I also started noticing changes in myself. My anger didn't vanish, but it softened. My fear of being alone didn't disappear, but I learned to walk with it. I laughed more easily. I cried less often. And with each passing week, I began to feel a sense of pride, of accomplishment, of survival. By the end of the year, I had saved a small amount of money, established a routine, and regained confidence. I was independent again. I could make decisions. I could dream again. The fear that had paralyzed me for months was giving way to hope. Most importantly, I realized that rebuilding wasn't about rushing. It wasn't about instant gratification or dramatic gestures. It was about showing up every day, doing the work, facing fear, embracing pain, celebrating small victories. I looked at Oliver one night, sleeping peacefully, and I realized something. Through all of this, I had learned how to survive, how to love, how to build a life from nothing. And slowly, I understood that the girl who had cried in that car, afraid and abandoned, had already started becoming the woman who would thrive. By the time spring rolled around, I had begun to notice changes in myself that I hadn't anticipated. The fear, the constant panic that had dominated my first weeks of freedom had softened. It hadn't disappeared. Betrayal leaves scars, after all, but it no longer controlled me. I was learning to breathe again, not just for survival, but for life. Work at the bakery became more than a paycheck. Each day, I greeted the same customers, baked the same loaves, but every small interaction reminded me of something fundamental. I was capable. I could show up. I could be useful. I could be trusted. And most importantly, I could enjoy myself again, even in the simplest of moments. I began to think more about Oliver and our little routines. He thrived on structure, and I learned quickly that my own sense of control and routine wasn't just for me, it was for him. Breakfast together, brushing teeth, getting ready for daycare, preparing snacks, all mundane, but they became a kind of meditation. Each small act was a thread weaving the fabric of our new life. One afternoon, as we walked through the park, I watched Oliver chase a pigeon and realized that I had started to notice things again, small joys, fleeting moments that I had forgotten existed. I had stopped just surviving. I was beginning to live, and for the first time in months, I felt the stirrings of hope, not just for me, but for the life I wanted to build for both of us. Rebuilding wasn't without struggle. There were mornings when the alarm seemed too loud, when exhaustion pressed against my chest, when the weight of bills and responsibilities seemed unbearable. But I found a rhythm, a way to keep moving forward, even when every step felt heavy. I also began reflecting on my identity beyond motherhood. Who was I beyond being Emma, Ryan's wife, or Emma, Oliver's mother? I started journaling more intentionally. Not just about the day, but about my feelings, my desires, my past mistakes, my hopes. I rediscovered passions I had shelved long ago, reading novels I loved but never finished, sketching in my notebook, imagining adventures I might one day take. Slowly, I began reconnecting with friends I had drifted from. I realized that part of rebuilding wasn't just about financial stability or surviving day-to-day life. It was about reconnecting with the human connections that sustain us. Even a simple coffee with a friend or a phone call with someone who genuinely cares felt like a lifeline. Financially, things were still tight. Every paycheck had to be stretched, and unexpected expenses could throw everything into chaos. I became creative. I learned how to repurpose leftovers into meals. I discovered local free events for Oliver. I became meticulous with budgeting. Every small success reinforced the idea that I could be trusted with my life, that I could trust myself. And yet, despite all the practical victories, emotional wounds remained. There were nights when I would wake up suddenly, heart racing, haunted by the memory of Ryan's betrayal. The image of him, smiling with someone else, haunted my thoughts. But instead of letting it consume me, I started to examine the feelings. Anger, sadness, fear, all natural, all valid. I began telling myself, "You are allowed to feel this, but it does not define you." Through this reflection, I realized something profound. Rebuilding isn't just about fixing external circumstances. It's about reclaiming your internal world. It's about taking back the narrative of your life from someone who tried to take it away. I was no longer the frightened woman in the car that night. I was Emma, whole, flawed, resilient. One of the most important lessons I learned during this time was about boundaries. Trust had to be earned, not freely given. I learned to say no, to protect my energy, to prioritize my needs alongside Oliver's. It was a radical act of self-love, one that I hadn't practiced in years. I also began to explore the idea of joy again. Not the fleeting, conditional happiness I had chased with Ryan, but something deeper. Moments like walking Oliver to the park and watching him discover a caterpillar, laughing over spilled cereal, singing silly songs on the way home. These became anchors of joy in a life that was slowly, deliberately, reclaiming itself. Social media, once a source of pain, became something I could manage. I no longer needed to compare my life to others, to see Ryan with his new partner. I had my own story, messy and imperfect. But mine, I began posting small updates, pictures of Oliver's drawings, recipes I tried, funny moments in daily life. Sharing joy, even in small doses, felt like reclaiming a part of myself I thought was lost. Months turned into a year. I had saved a small amount of money. I had established routines. I had found joy. And slowly, quietly, the person I was before betrayal, the woman who dreamed, who hoped, who loved life started to return. But she was different now, stronger, wiser, more aware of her worth. The final piece of rebuilding was perhaps the hardest: forgiveness. Not for Ryan, Not for what he had done, but for myself. I forgave myself for trusting, for hoping, for being vulnerable. I forgave myself for being human. And in that forgiveness, I discovered a new kind of freedom. By the end of this chapter of my life, I was no longer just surviving. I was rebuilding. I was growing. And every small act of love for myself, for Oliver, for the life we were creating, became proof that the hardest battles can lead to the most meaningful victories. By the time summer arrived, life had found a rhythm I had never thought possible. Oliver was thriving, learning new words every day, his laughter filling our tiny apartment in ways that made my heart ache and swell at the same time. I had work, friends, routines, and a sense of stability I had almost forgotten existed. And yet, there was still a quiet part of me, a cautious, protective part that refused to consider anything beyond survival. I wasn't looking for love, not anymore, not after Ryan. I had been burned. I knew now how quickly a life could crumble, how trust could be violated in ways you couldn't predict. And yet, life has a funny way of challenging your rules. It happened on a rainy Thursday. The streets glistened under the drizzle, and I was juggling Oliver's stroller, groceries, and an umbrella that insisted on flipping inside out. I had just finished a long shift at the bakery and was heading home, exhausted, when he appeared. He was holding an oversized umbrella, neon jacket dripping rainwater, a crooked smile on his face that made me almost laugh despite myself. "You guys sell happiness here, right?" he said, nodding toward the bakery. "Because I could use some." And just like that, Daniel entered my life. Quietly, unexpectedly, lightly. I panicked at first. Introducing a new person into our lives felt impossible. I had grown protective, almost defensive. Being a single mom wasn't easy, and the thought of anyone influencing our fragile little world made me uneasy. But Daniel was different. He didn't rush. He didn't demand. He didn't try to fix anything. He simply showed up. Our first interactions were casual, almost accidental. He would stop by the bakery occasionally, make small jokes, ask about Oliver's drawings displayed on the fridge, comment on the weather, offer a friendly smile. No pressure, no expectations. And somehow, that was enough to make me curious and eventually comfortable. Slowly, over weeks and months, I started seeing him differently. It wasn't about romantic sparks or butterflies at first. It was about safety. It was about seeing someone show up consistently, with honesty and kindness, without asking for anything in return. It was the contrast to the betrayal I had endured. It was refreshing, grounding, and unexpectedly comforting. I remember one Saturday afternoon vividly. We were at the park, Oliver running ahead of us, squealing as he climbed a jungle gym, and Daniel just walked beside me. We talked about everything and nothing: books, movies, childhood memories, and I realized I hadn't felt this at ease with anyone in years. There was no pressure, no judgment, just presence. Being with Daniel made me reflect on my own capacity to trust again. Love, I realized, isn't about rescuing you. It's about respecting the rescue you've already performed on yourself. He didn't complete me. He didn't fill in gaps I had left alone. He simply respected the woman I had become. Strong, independent, flawed, but resilient. There were challenges. Of course there were. Sometimes fear would creep in. What if this ended badly, like before? Could I allow myself to be vulnerable again? But each time fear appeared, I reminded myself, I am allowed to protect myself, but I am also allowed to grow, to open my heart in measured ways. Oliver adored Daniel from the beginning. Watching their interactions, Daniel reading silly bedtime stories, laughing at Oliver's jokes, encouraging him to explore the world, reinforced my belief that love could exist without fear. Not romantic love alone, but love as a force that nurtures, protects, and grows organically. And slowly, my own heart began to feel lighter. I laughed more easily. I noticed the small joys again. Sunny mornings, fresh bread from the bakery, the way Oliver would jump into my arms and hug me tightly after daycare. I began to see that life was not about avoiding pain. It was about finding the courage to live fully despite it. By the end of the year, Daniel had become a quiet, steady presence. Not perfect, not flawless. He had his own quirks and imperfections, but he showed up, consistently, authentically. And through this consistency, he taught me something vital. Real love is patient, respectful, and grounded in truth. It doesn't demand, it doesn't manipulate. It simply grows alongside the people who are ready to receive it. This chapter of my life also deepened my understanding of what it means to rebuild trust. Trust is not a gift to be given freely. It is a choice, earned slowly, deliberately, moment by moment. Daniel's patience reminded me that healthy relationships don't need to rush, that the most meaningful connections are often the ones that respect time, space, and personal history. I also began to see love in small, everyday acts. Cooking breakfast for Oliver, cleaning the apartment, laughing over spilled cereal, reading bedtime stories, these moments became sacred. They reminded me that love is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is simply showing up, day after day, fully present. And in these small moments, I discovered something profound. Life isn't about waiting for a perfect love story. It's about creating one with what you have, with the people who are genuinely present, and with the resilience you have nurtured in yourself. By the end of this chapter, I had learned that love is not about completing you. It's about choosing to honor yourself first, nurturing your own life, and then allowing someone else to join, fully and authentically, in the journey you are already traveling. Looking back, it's almost surreal to think about the path that led me here. From the night Ryan kicked me out with Oliver in my arms to the life we have now, it feels like a story from someone else's life. And yet, every tear, every sleepless night, every small victory along the way, all of it belongs to me. The first lesson I learned is this: pain does not mean weakness. Feeling heartbroken, betrayed, abandoned, these are not signs of failure. They are signs of love. They are proof that you have the capacity to care deeply, to open yourself to another person, to hope, to dream. And the fact that you can survive that pain, that's strength, that's courage, that's resilience. I've realized that relationships are not about completing each other. They are not about filling voids or patching old wounds. Healthy relationships, the kind that last, the kind that nurture, are about two whole individuals choosing to walk together while still standing firmly on their own. Daniel didn't complete me. He met me whole, respected my boundaries, supported my growth, and together we built a life that was more joyful because we were already strong on our own. Parenthood, too, reshaped my understanding of love. Oliver is my anchor, my reminder of what truly matters. Loving him, raising him, watching him learn about the world, it taught me patience, humility, and the kind of joy that is steady and profound. There is a certain kind of magic in the small everyday acts of care. Making breakfast, reading stories, wiping tears, encouraging curiosity. These moments remind me that life is built in fragments, not grand gestures. I've also learned to forgive, not Ryan, not the circumstances, but myself. I forgave myself for trusting too easily, for hoping, for being vulnerable. I forgave myself for being human. And in that forgiveness, I discovered freedom. Forgiving doesn't erase pain. It doesn't excuse betrayal. But it allows you to move forward without carrying the weight of resentment in every step. The process of rebuilding isn't linear. Some days I still feel pangs of anger, or sadness, or doubt. Some days, the memory of the past creeps in uninvited. But I've learned that these moments do not define me. I've learned to let them exist without letting them dictate my life. I've learned to create a new narrative, one where I am the author, not the victim. Love, I've come to understand, is more than romance. It is patience. It is respect. It is the willingness to show up, consistently, for yourself and for those you care about. It is understanding that connection grows slowly, nurtured by honesty, kindness, and mutual respect. The loud, dramatic love stories of movies are beautiful to watch. But real love, the kind that sustains a lifetime, is quiet, persistent, and grounded in reality. I think about trust a lot. Trust is not a gift. It is a practice. It is built brick by brick, through consistent action, through proof over time, through respect and empathy. Ryan destroyed trust in my life, but Daniel helped me rebuild it, not through grand gestures, but through simple, consistent presence. And that's how I know that true love can arrive after betrayal, but only if you've first learned to trust yourself. Freedom, too, has a different meaning now. Freedom is not just the absence of oppression or betrayal. It is the ability to choose your life intentionally, to make decisions with clarity, to protect your heart while still allowing it to grow. It is waking up each morning knowing that you are capable of joy, capable of care, capable of creating a life worth living. And finally, I have learned that happiness is not a destination. It is not a single moment or achievement. It is found in the fragments, the quiet mornings with Oliver, the laughter over burnt pancakes, the comforting scent of fresh bread from the bakery, the gentle presence of someone who respects you. Happiness is stitched together, day by day, through intention, resilience, and love. So, here we are. My life is not perfect. It never will be. But it is ours. Oliver and I, together, building a home, a life, a story worth telling. I laugh, I cry, I stumble, and I rise. I love, I protect, I nurture, and I allow myself to receive love in return. And I know now, more than ever, that the hardest endings can lead to the most beautiful beginnings. If I could speak to anyone going through betrayal or heartbreak, I would say this: you are not broken. You are not lost. You are becoming. And every step you take, even the smallest, is part of a journey that can lead to joy, peace, and love in forms you may never have imagined. I have learned that life, love, and relationships are not about perfection. They are about courage, resilience, empathy, and showing up for yourself, for your child, for the people who matter. And when you do that, when you truly show up, you will find that love has a way of returning to you, quietly, gently, persistently, when the time is right. And that, I have discovered, is the real story. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real feeling, emotional stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. It really helps support us. And I'd love to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Have you ever experienced something similar or felt the same way as I did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And your stories might inspire the next video. Thank you for watching. And remember, no matter what life throws at you, strength, love, and hope are always possible.